next speaker, Mr. Marc Freedman. Marc is the founder and CEO of Co-Generate, a company that focuses on the vast and growing older population that can collaborate with younger generations to solve some of society's most pressing problems. He's a social entrepreneur, a best-selling author, and a global expert on the longevity revolution, and most importantly, a global expert on the promise of age diversity. Marc also co-founded Experience Corps to mobilize people over 50 to improve the school performance and prospects of low-income elementary schools in the US, a program that has now been run by the AARP. So with that, I welcome on stage Mr. Marc Freedman.
Thank you so much, Radha, and I wanted to offer my congratulations to the SO Foundation on this milestone 30th anniversary. I've been thinking about milestone anniversaries recently because the day that I left to come to Singapore, I received my Medicare card, having just turned 65 years old. And I've got to say, it was a bit of a shock. I started out doing this work as a young person focused on young people, and now I guess I'm an old person and I'm, as Radha was saying, focusing very much on older people. But my interest began by trying to address one of the most significant needs of young people growing up in poverty in America some 30 years ago. And it was a time when there was very little attention or respect given to the importance of relationships for young people. And yet when you would talk to young people in schools or in youth programs and ask them what mattered most, it was always a person. And this disjuncture between what the experts were talking about, in fact, at that point, there was a movement around teacher-proof curricula in education, this idea that we could remove the messy human element from schools, which would make programs maybe easier to evaluate. And yet, talking to young people, you heard something very different. So, along with others, I launched a study of the largest mentoring program in the United States, Big Brothers Big Sisters. And at that point, Big Brothers Big Sisters was serving 70,000 young people, but there were 30,000 children on the waiting list for that program, and they were waiting a year and a half to get a caring adult, which was bad for children, but good for social science researchers. We were able to take 1,000 kids. For 500 of them received Big Sisters and Big Brothers mentors for 18 months, and the other 500 waited. And at the end of that period, there was a 46% difference in young people using drugs, a 50% difference in school truancy, and a 33% difference in violent behavior. And these numbers were shocking. They were outperforming all of the most sophisticated programs, for example, to keep young people from using drugs. And we just assumed there had to be some kind of methodological error that we made. So we brought in experts in research methods, but there was no methodological error. And quite remarkably, these caring adults were doing things that weren't particularly sophisticated. They were taking young people to McDonald's and probably, based on the past panel, single-handedly undermining the longevity revolution, and yet they were having a profound impact on the lives of kids. After the euphoria of the benefits from these caring adult relationships subsided, there was a realization that if this kind of bond was so important, why is it that 30,000 kids were languishing for a year and a half waiting for these kinds of connections? In fact, around the same time that these research findings were coming out, one of the preeminent child development experts in the United States, Yuri Bronfenbrenner, who was at the end of his career, he had started the preeminent early childhood program, was asked what he had learned from half a century studying what worked for kids. And he said that what every child needs is at least one adult who's irrationally crazy about them. So the question became, where can we find irrationally crazy adults for these young people? And even then, before we were hearing as much about the aging society or the longevity revolution, it seemed like a potential profound answer was in the growing older population, which was set to double over the next quarter century. And it was a population that not only had numbers, but discretionary time. Older people, study after study showed, were watching the most TV of any segment of the population. And this was long before Netflix and HBO Max and Good TV. These are reruns of bad shows like Gilligan's Island. I don't know if Gilligan's Island ever aired in Singapore. If it didn't, you're fortunate. But there was a large segment of the population whose time was not being particularly well used. And so with Dr. Linda Fried, who's been in Singapore this week, working with John Wong and others, we created something called the Experience Corps. And it was a core of older adults. Radha mentioned that it's now run by AARP, who spend 15 hours a week working in schools with low-income children, trying to help them read by the 3rd grade, but just as importantly, forming deep bonds. And after the program had been underway for a number of years, research study after research study came out showing strong mutual benefits from Experience Corps. And there were already inklings from the beginning that these benefits were running both ways. I remember we picked the name Experience Corps to honor the accumulated wisdom and know-how and experience of the older people who were involved. And yet when you talk to the older people, they were surprised to hear that. They thought it was a program where you went to have experiences, to have these opportunities to learn and grow. And the research showed that young people were benefiting enormously, learning how to read at much higher levels than their peers, and that the older people were reaping a whole set of important benefits. In fact, one study by Linda and her colleagues at Johns Hopkins Medical School showed that participation in Experience Corps reversed the preconditions of dementia. But when I think back at Experience Corps and what we learned from it, I tend to think of the stories that came out of that program every bit as much as the statistics and research findings. And one story I've been thinking about a lot lately, partly because the person featured in it, a woman named Martha Jones, who was in a group of Experience Corps members which had 2 women named Martha. One was Big Martha and the other one was Little Martha. Martha Jones was Little Martha, and her picture hangs over our office in San Francisco. And she told me the story one day when her alarm went off and she knew she was supposed to go to the Taylor Elementary School to be part of her Experience Corps group. And it was a cold February day in Philadelphia, and she was depressed. She didn't feel like getting out of bed. And she decided that she was going to stay in bed a little bit longer. And then she stayed a little bit longer, and she thought about just skipping going to the Taylor Elementary School that day. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that if she didn't show up, the children would be wondering where she was, that she was part of this web of interdependence, which we heard about in the last panel. And I keep thinking of Paul Ang's list of the characteristics of remaining healthy. So she got out of bed. She took a shower. She put on her clothes. She walked down the stairs. She took the bus to the Taylor Elementary School. And when she arrived at the school, she was still feeling down. And she went into the classroom, and she was hanging her coat up on a hook, and it was the 1920s old dilapidated school building. And she recalled to me feeling these two little arms climbing from behind her. And she exclaimed out loud, "Somebody loves me." And I think that that really captured what we were doing at Experience Corps. You know, it was about efficiency in a way, this untapped resource of older adults and these unmet needs of young people. But it was every bit as much, and is every bit as much, about humanity, dare I say, love. When these research findings came in and these stories, I thought about the words of the poet Marge Piercy, who wrote, "The pitcher cries for water to carry and a person for work that is real." But the work that was real for Martha was also every bit as much about social connection. But I wondered if this program was working so well in so many different ways, why wasn't it just happening naturally? Martha Jones lived in that neighborhood with the school. She had actually gone to that school. And for 20 years, I've been thinking about that question about why these kinds of bonds, which are so mutually beneficial, don't just happen in the course of daily life. And I know this is an observation that's based heavily on the United States, but I think it has some implications for Singapore and for other parts of the world. The reason that it doesn't happen naturally is because in my country, for the past 100 years, we've thwarted that possibility at every turn. In the United States, in the 19th century, older people and people of all ages didn't even know how old they were. Birthdays weren't celebrated, and the society, even though it had many fewer older people, was integrated by age in every aspect. Older and younger people worked side by side on farms in an agrarian economy. 5-year-olds and 50-year-olds learned the alphabet in a one-room schoolhouse environment. Multi-generational living was the norm. And then as we moved into the 20th century, we systematically undid all of those kinds of interdependent ties that were so much the norm in the previous years. We passed one well-intentioned and important progressive piece of legislation after another. Child labor laws, universal schooling led to young people congregating with other young people in schools. Incredibly important reforms like our Social Security program had an intended result in the heart of the Depression, when we had such high unemployment for young people, of nudging older people out of the workforce. And then one after another, with absolute brilliance and creativity and entrepreneurial zeal, we invented social institutions that put older people together with their peers. Nursing homes, senior centers, retirement communities. I could go on. And the end result was a reorganization of society by age. Young people with other young people, middle people with other middle people in the workplace, older people in settings with their peers. And the end result is that the generational twains cease to meet. Andrew Scott, who wrote The 100-Year Life, which I know many of you have read, wrote that at the end of the 20th century, the United States had gone from one of the most age-integrated societies in the world to one of the most age-segregated. He describes a state of age apartheid. And the end result of this reorganization of society, even though each individual measure had many benefits, was, in my view, a grievous wound. Is it any surprise in a society that's in a state of age apartheid that there's worry about generational conflict? Is it any surprise that ageism is rampant? Is it any surprise that social isolation is widespread, particularly among young people, but older people are afflicted as well? Is it any surprise that people have no idea how to grow older gracefully when they have very little contact with people of other ages, or that generations are struggling to figure out how to work together when there's so little opportunity to practice that in daily life. So this reorganization has led to a whole set of problems. It also amounts to an extraordinary missed opportunity. I continue to hear the SO Foundation's tagline, longevity is opportunity. And what I've learned since those early days working with young people is that we older adults, and I can say this now with extra conviction as a 65-year-old, we need to be irrationally crazy about young people every bit as much as they need us to be that way. Laura Carstensen talked this morning about some of these ideas. I've been deeply influenced by her research on socio-emotional selectivity, and I fear with Laura in the audience that I will mischaracterize it, but the way I think of it is that, and I feel this in my own life, is that we older people are particularly drawn to relationship, that we are particularly skilled at those characteristics that are important for building and sustaining relationships, things like emotional regulation, empathy. And the Harvard Study of Adult Development, which is the longest standing study of happiness and well-being in adulthood, has shown that older people who connect with younger people are 3 times as likely to be happy as those who fail to do so. George Valen, who led that study for 40 years, says it's not happenstance that biology flows downhill. And new research by the anthropologist Michael Gervin at the University of California, Santa Barbara, who studies hunter-gatherer societies, suggests that that role of older people as teacher is something that's been an essential feature of human evolution for thousands of years. So I feel like we have created a mismatch between what human thriving, human development, human evolution tells us should be the role of older people and what older people are able to do in the course of daily life, certainly in my country, and I believe in many other places, and that's a problem, but it couldn't be a more timely issue in the context of the age diversity that we've heard about earlier today and that's become a feature all around the globe. Laura said that it's not that we're becoming aging society, it's that we're becoming age-diverse societies. In the United States, 25% of the population is under 20, 23% is over 60, 52% in the middle, and the new Map of Life report shows that roughly it is that rectangle, that we have the same number of people at every age from 0 to 74, and that's a number that's just going to extend further and further into the future. So this mismatch between age diversity and age segregation is a source of significant problems. It's also a missed opportunity, and it's something that we're going to need to turn around. And I think that one of the main messages that I wanted to deliver today is that that's actually starting to happen. In the United States, we've seen a remarkable development in popular culture where older and younger people are coming together in the arts, in music. Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga just won a bevy of Grammy Awards. In one television show after another, we're seeing older and younger characters coming together to do things that neither group could do on their own. If that's happening in the air, on the ground, there's been a 4-fold increase in multi-generational living. Today in the United States, some 60 million people are living in 3 or 4 generation households. We just did a survey of older and younger people and asked them if they were interested in working together to solve the leading problems of the day. We found deep pent-up demand, and the most important issues that both groups said that they wanted to work on were climate change and mental health. But they expressed worry about 2 problems. One is that people across ages have forgotten how to talk to each other because there's so little opportunity to do that, and it's become much too hard for people who want to move in that direction, who want to work across generational lines, to go from aspiration to action. And that's why I'm so happy that we're seeing all over the globe a wave of social innovation that's solving this problem of doability. And we've had some gatherings this week with Ashoka, which is a global network of social innovators. And when I became an Ashoka Fellow some 20 years ago, there were very few of us who were working on these issues. Now I believe there's 70 social entrepreneurs around the world who are doing that. And we're seeing profound ideas come up in every important sphere of daily life. In housing, I went to a place called Judson Manor in Cleveland in the Rust Belt in the United States in the middle of winter, just before the pandemic. And when I showed up at Judson Manor, I was greeted by 30 Swedish social scientists. So when the Scandinavian social scientists are coming to the United States to try to find better ways of living, you know that there must be something good that's happening. And the good thing that was happening at Judson Manor is that this senior living facility filled with arts-loving older people had created a program for young musicians, students at the local music conservatory, to live side by side with the older residents. And it's something that grew out of efficiency, this idea that young people who were struggling to find affordable housing would have a place to live, and arts-loving older people would have more concerts in their midst. But again, what started in efficiency ended up in humanity. I met a 93-year-old woman named Carla who lived next door to a young violist, and they both loved music. And when that young violist got married to another young violist, they didn't invite Carla to the wedding. They asked her to be the maid of honor. And it I think, captured one of the most important set of lessons for those of us who are trying to build these generational bridges: proximity and purpose. They lived next door to each other. They ran into each other in the course of daily life, and they had a shared interest. In this case, it was music. There are wonderful examples in other spheres. We have a program at our organization called the Encore Fellows Program, where people over the age of 50 will use their midlife skills, work in NGOs, and one of the most profound developments in that program has been that the older people have formed relationships with the young leaders of those programs. And they haven't just been mentors in the way that maybe I thought of when we were doing Experience Corps, but they've become what my friend and colleague Chip Conley describes as mentorns. They're part mentors and part interns, and he has the idea of being a modern elder, a wise and sage on the one hand, and someone with a beginner mind on the other. He came up with that idea when he was tapped in his 50s after he had sold his hotel company to work and advise the young founders of Airbnb, and he discovered he was learning as much as he was imparting. In higher education, there's been a proliferation of programs in the United States that's now become global for older people to go to campus for a year and have an additional year of schooling. One of the things that's happened in the course of that is that they've age-integrated universities. It's been underway at Stanford and Harvard and Notre Dame. I went to the University of Minnesota's program a few years ago, and I was talking to an undergraduate who was in a future of work class. And she said at the beginning she was wondering why there were all these older people in her class, and then she realized that they had actually worked. So I think we're seeing these wonderful examples in so many different spheres, but what we need to do is to integrate them in ways, and in places like Singapore have an enormous opportunity to do that, where we shift the default position of society from one which has generations apart to one which has generations together. And I think doing that is going to require overcoming three barriers: a failure of imagination, a failure of innovation, and a failure of investment. Laura talked this morning about if we can't envision something, we can't enact it. And we've, I think, in many ways lost that sense of what a thriving, multi-generational society can be. We're going to need to be as creative in the innovation sphere in bringing people together across ages as we've been in splitting them apart. And we're going to need to provide the resources through public policy, through philanthropy, through other sources to do this work at a scale commensurate with the need and with the opportunity. So I think we're going to need to make it credible, doable, and scalable. But if we pull that off, and I'll just conclude with these final thoughts, I think we can create a society that's better at solving problems, that brings the unique assets of the generations together to do what no age group could do on its own. I think we can achieve greater social cohesion in this multi-generational time. And I think we can recapture a sense of the wholeness of life, which I think we've lost as we've split up age groups in such a pronounced way. And I think ultimately, and I'll finish with this and go back to the story of Martha Jones, is that I think we can create a society that has more love, where people know that somebody loves them, where they're part of this inextricable web of interdependence. One of my favorite TV shows, which shows older and younger people coming together, oftentimes despite initial resistance, and that's won many Emmy Awards over the last couple of years in the United States, is called Hacks. And when Hacks came out, the New York Times review described it as a love story disguised as a hate story. And you know, we hear about art imitating life. Well, my hope is that life can start imitating art, and that we can make out of this mismatch between age diversity and age segregation a new kind of alignment that produces a society of deep connection. And I can think of no better aspiration for this multi-generational moment that's already sweeping over us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marc, for that inspiring talk. We are living in the most age-diverse society in human history, but you know, relationships have weakened, and one consistent theme throughout this today has been the need to build social bonds, not just within generations, but across generations. So thank you for showing us some inspiring examples of how this can be done. Before we delve into the panel for today, may I invite Mr. Sekwi Neng on stage to give Mr. Freedman a token of our appreciation. I would now like to invite our panelists on stage, please. So this panel will be moderated by Lin Su Ling, who's the opinion editor of the Straits Times. And we have curated a very diverse collection of individuals, from social entrepreneurs to lifelong learners, and of course, even an environmental gerontologist, to talk about how we can build greater bonds and care, share, and collaborate across generations.
Oh, we're just getting settled in. I have a really big panel here, and I know that we come the last panel, so we stand between you and the end of your day. I know it's been a really interesting dialogue that we've had so far. Marc, you've given us a lot of food for thought. I love how you talked about we should think about the longevity dividend the same way that we talked about the youth dividend so many years ago, right? And at the end of the day, it's about building trust and connection in communities. Maybe to start off, I'll ask Thomas to kick off with some remarks. Thomas here is probably no stranger to most of you. He was ahead of his time already, and as the youngest and the most energetic on this panel, he's going to kick off with some thoughts. He's the founder of the Singapore chapter of the University of Third Age, and he's going to start us off by talking to us about his experience from that University of Third Age. So why don't you take us off?
Okay. Can you hear me? All right. So, Youth Third Age is part of a worldwide community of U3As. We are autonomous. We are not linked up to other people. We are just friends. All right. U3A worldwide actually started from France, then in 1970, then later on, 10 years later, the British started in 1980, because French and UK are always not very friendly, right? So from there, U3A spread all the way to Asia, and Singapore, we set up the U3A sometime in, for me, it's sometime in 2012, all right? Yeah, so U3A for me, the reason why I want to set up U3A is that because I feel that senior, among ourselves senior, we need to sort of share experience, and we also need to sort of keep on living. I think we all know very well that in 2030, about 23% of us will be aged over 65. That's about 1 in 4, right? So it's quite scary when you look at somebody out of 4%, one of them has so much time on hand, and what do they do, right? So my purpose is to sort of share with them how they can share their learning or their experience with other senior people around in Singapore, right? So I think that's all. I want to stop there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much,
Yeah.
Thomas. And I'll come back to you because you clearly have a lot of experience here
a lot
that we
more,
can
yeah,
dig
okay.
into. I'll ask Ling next to tell us a little bit more. She's Deputy Director at Open Government Products and Smart Nation Digital Government Group. She's also the co-founder of Better.sg, a volunteer-run nonprofit that drives the Tech for Good community platform. So maybe, Ling, you can get us started by talking to us a little bit about what you do and your experiences, also because you've had a lot of that in Singapore and in Hong Kong.
Thank you. Thanks, Su-Ling. Yeah, I think like Su-Ling mentioned, much of my experience is in the public sector. So I built digital software and products for Singapore mostly. And I grew up in Hong Kong, so I spent some time in my childhood actually accompanying my grandmother to their version of the Senior Activity Center, which is actually a dim sum place. That's where my grandma would she would bring me every morning, and I sort of had the experience of observing how different populations age in place. My current work actually is in building software, and a lot of what we do, because we have to target, we don't have a single target audience, it's everybody. So in the case of, let's say, vaccine distribution, we've had to design our products in such a way that it's intuitive for not just young people who are very smartphone savvy, but also older adults who may not have access or who are a bit less familiar with digital technology. What was surprising during our journey was that actually we grossly underestimate how digitally savvy our older adults can be. So as a case in point, when we built the vaccination appointment system, guess how many % of our seniors actually booked online as opposed to walk in to our CCs or vaccination centers? It's actually about 50%. So half of our seniors were able to book via the smartphones and access their vaccination appointments. So I think we, in our daily lives, a lot of our seniors are often told, they are not as digitally savvy, we need to bridge. And that's true, but there's also a big segment that is very savvy, and it would be a missed market opportunity, so to speak, if we don't design for them. I think the second thing I'll maybe share about my work is with Better.sg, which is a Tech for Good movement in Singapore. And in that line of work, we realized that actually a lot of volunteers do come from different ages. It's not just youth who are volunteering to build Tech for Good. There are also seniors, older adults whom we work with. The other part of volunteerism, less about Better.sg, is the Singapore Healthcare Core. I would say we wouldn't have gotten through the pandemic without this core group of older adults who came back to serve amidst the pandemic. And this was during my time in Ministry of Health when we were starting the Healthcare Core and getting volunteers to come back. This group of retired ICU nurses came back and did training for the group of swabbers who were later deployed by the Health Promotion Board on the ground to do swabbing. And I would say quite literally wouldn't have gotten through the pandemic without this group of very dedicated older adults who were very committed to doing infection control training, nasopharyngeal swab training. With their experience, we were able to really get through the pandemic way more effectively than without them. Yeah, so I think that's been my experience working with different segments, both the youth and digital space, and also with the older adults, whom I think really delivers tremendous value. Yeah.
Thanks, Chilling. And of course, now we'll go to Adrian. Adrian Tan here is co-founder of SG Assist, connecting caregivers with community volunteers to care for their elderly loved ones. Adrian, maybe you can start us off by telling us a little bit about what SG Assist does and your views coming into this panel.
Yeah. Right, thank you. So SG Assist was set up by a bunch of caregivers. We initially came together because we wanted to solve a problem that we face as someone who, with lived experience supporting our loved ones with issues, like myself, taking care of my mother who went through breast cancer, got into depression, anxiety, almost divorced each other's, and almost having to give up my studies so that my younger siblings can go to studies and so on. And that really got me, I think partially got me passionate into this matter. And on one occasion met my canemate / co-founder right now, that we decided to come out and do something for caregivers. And the very first thing that we wanted to solve was that how might we create a platform to really bring the community together to support just one single problem, which is that caregivers frequently have ad hoc needs to check in to our loved ones, buying food for them, getting groceries and stuff. And during the pandemic, the app suddenly just worked as it is, and people started using our app to support their loved ones at home. We have about 6,000 volunteers island-wide, and it actually got us evolved to a different state when we got to build more capacity in terms of our network with different social services, caregivers from different communities, and eventually we started our own call center, which provides helpline during the pandemic to support seniors who don't know how to navigate the situations, who might know that they actually gotten COVID, but can they leave their house but starving for days. Suddenly our numbers got spread into the community, and through that, we evolved our call center into a remote monitoring service called Care Connect. So we actually provide home monitoring such as SOS button. Unlike the ones that you find in rental flat, we're actually supporting more towards the 3-room flats and above to support elderlies to age in place safely and while keeping their caregivers updated about all the situations that they may be facing. Yeah. And also supporting the potential social isolation they might be having. So through doing Care Connect, we realized that there's so much more that we can do as an organization. We started building programs together with our social service agency partners. We started training service users of social services to become our community care agents. We train seniors to be able to provide befriending, supporting active aging centers in their program. And eventually now, some of them are working with us in our call center, provide that remote monitoring for other seniors who are our subscribers or our users. So they become a workforce that support us in helping caring for other seniors. In the months to come, we will be working with Singapore Universities of Social Science, SUSS, to actually train more seniors in Jurong Technology Ambassadors so that they can even train other seniors on using technology to improve their own life. So as all these things, small little things that we do, if we even thought that, hey, maybe let's start a resource center, even though we're a for-profit entity, but we're very capable, want to do a lot of things. So we actually started a caregiver resource center at Khatib area. The first thing that we did when we launched in February this year is that we want to co-create initiative with fellow caregivers with vested interest, just like myself. I just not so happy with all my 15 years of journey as a caregiver. I want to venture that out. And I want to do something for other caregivers. And because of that, within 2 months, we have actually run at least 5 different programs we actually helped 98 families to complete their LPA totally for free, and supported many caregivers to actually run other programs in the community. So my time is out, but I think the last thing that I wanted to emphasize, because of one simple conversation that I actually heard over a panel yesterday, is that the youth may find that they may be pressured to look after the older generation in time to come, but how might we change that impression if we were to convince seniors to be able to become a care partner to their younger generation, so that they see that both age group can provide intergenerational support to each other to walk this journey more at ease. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. And our last speaker is Dr. Amy Kiyota. Amy here is the Deputy Executive Director for the Centre of Population Health at the National University of Singapore, an Associate Professor at the NUS Yong Yulin School of Medicine and College of Design and Engineering. So Amy, tell us, you've got wide experiences in the US, Japan, and now in Singapore, looking at the relationship that we have with our built environment as we age. Could you talk to us a little bit about that and how we should evolve placemaking even?
Okay. This was not the first one, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, so I'd like to talk a little bit about, I want to focus on the built environment today, really, and it's really the learning that I had and how it has been applied. And I didn't think it was 5 minutes, so I had so many slides, so I'm just gonna fly through. So this is not my grandmother, by the way, because when I talk about my grandmother, I cry. But this is a woman I worked with through Ibasho, some of you may know. So my beloved professor, when I was in graduate school, he actually taught me that, societal expectation shape architecture, and architecture reinforce what societal expectation is. I was walking down the street from the National Gallery to the hospital, and it was a very stark image that stuck to me, that the National Gallery is so beautiful, and we design for it. Why do we design hospital the way we do? Because we always have a different expectation. Maybe that's what we might be doing for elder care, and how can we change? Oops, okay. So maybe because we don't have imaginations. So this is interesting photos that I really love, actually. One up there, it is more car-oriented city. It's the same place in the same location, and down, the one on the down, it's walkability is really focused. Same place, but people's imagination can actually change environment. That actually change the persons who are using this space. This is not an age-friendly slide, by the way. I asked design students to come up with these beautiful slides. So WHO talking about age-friendly cities, and interestingly, it's 8 items, and 3 of them are about built environment. That really tells you that sometimes age-friendly cities, people think that it is only about built environment. 5 of them are not built environment. And this is new map of life photos that I took. I love this because age-friendly city was, many years ago, they were talking about transportations, walkabilities. New map of life really talk about environment issues, intergenerational built environment. I think, so what we need is imagination, and we really reshape the idea. Part of the reshaping idea, what we try to do here in Singapore, I'm involved in this health district at Queenstown project. So it is a multi-sectorial approach to really bring our idea from healthcare focus into health really focus. And we have colleague, I hope still Lending is here. Our goal is to create healthy and purposeful longevity, and bring intergenerational bonding, and bring social cohesion through housing board, university hospital system, and universities. Is that easy? No, there is a very complex project, and it's lots of challenges, but we are working on this every day. When we're talking about this Health District project, these are the 5 things I always encounter, we always have to remind it by. You know, we have a tendency to try to design to protect elders, but that might create dependency if we're not careful. Provide special service in elders, that could create ageism, and specially designed services and built environment might create stigma. Age-specific design might create segregations, and excessive convenience and technology may really create social isolation we don't want to have. How can we design this? I'm not going to go to like a detail since I don't have a whole lot of time. But the yellow line, I don't know if I have this. Yeah, the yellow line is where optimal sort of situation. So this is a competence, like how human beings' ability. This is the environment, you know, how environment is, you know, adaptable or not. So if you go to strong, if you have a lot of environmental press, means that many stairs or something, right? And then if you have lower competence, normally when you age, that goes from the top down. Unfortunately, that happens to everyone. So when you're older, you are able to handle, you know, narrower area of adaptations. If you're young, you can actually handle a lot of environmental press. So what we do is to either design this green space, which is you feel comfortable, you can do it, or this red area, which is too easy or too difficult to adapt it, so people don't do it. What I would like to suggest for us to think about is this marginal area, which if you do one more step further to do something, you can do it. That's the kind of place we don't make enough. So I will highly encourage you to think about that when we start to design. So I don't have time, but I just wanted to end with 8 principles. Some of you may know that I have an NGO working on Ibasho. What we try to do is to really change the narrative of aging from someone who I have to look after my grandmother to having her to help us out so we can all grow. To do it, basically what we try to do is to implement this 8 Ibasho principle. It is a set of common sense. Again, my advisor always said, some of the common sense has to be repeated. So I am repeating this. And so basically what we try to do is to have this 8 principle into both program and how our mindset is, and also how to design the space. So the last one I would like to, it's only one that I would like to focus on here, is the embracing imperfection. Sometimes we try so much to design imperfection for a place. What can we create with the perfection? Hospital, institution, that you can control their life. And we want to actually reverse that. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now, if you have any questions, there's always Slido, and I think they'll put the slide up showing the QR code that you can scan. But I'd like to encourage all of you to come to the mic, because we all know that it's more interactive when you do come out and speak and ask your question with your name and organization. But of course, as moderator, I'm just going to cast the first question first. I know we're all around here converts. We all agree that in order to build a longevity-ready society, we need the built environment, we need the social organization, as well as the culture that supports that kind of a movement. And I think you've heard a lot of that from our speakers already today, not just on this panel, but on the earlier panels on how that can be achieved. But let me just ask a devil's advocate question, because none of us will ask this question. I know that we want to move towards a society where we have one that's intergenerational, and it's not about, like what Marc said, the old classified with the old and the young classified with the young. We're more resilient when we can tap on the wisdom and lived experience of our seniors that can inform the tough decisions and challenges that youth face today. But what do you say when people ask, do young people really want to be involved? Because they are energized when they're near other young people. So then, and they're also busy, they're growing their careers, their families, their aspirations. How do you tackle that mindset that spending time around older people is not much of a value proposition? Again, just being a devil's advocate. Mark, why don't you start us off?
It's a great question. And when as a 65-year-old, when I was growing up, you heard a lot about the generation gap. And one of the mantras was never trust anybody over 30. But I think things have changed, at least in the context I know best, the United States. The survey that we did in November with the University of Chicago showed not only an interest in both older and younger people working together, but that younger people, particularly younger people of color, were twice as interested as older whites in doing this kind of work. And there were two messages I feel like that were coming beyond the data. One was that older people like me can't create these problems and then pat us on the back and say, go fix them. And the second is that no one generation can fix problems like climate on their own. So I think that there's a real opportunity at this point. But in some ways, young people are actually, in my country at least, are leading the charge. We'd sometimes think of that there's a potential movement of modern elders, which I talked about before, and old souls, young people who just have this inclination to work with older people.
Maybe, Thomas, a second question to you then. Obviously, as the youngest on this panel, tell me one thing you wish people my age knew about growing old, about reaching the healthy age that you are right now.
I'm not that old, right? I respect Bob here, Dexter. They are 90 years old around the corner. Dexter, they are the real senior around. So you want to, in fact, I want to share with you my platform, which I did not have a chance earlier. We have what they call SMS, Senior Meet Senior, whereby our senior will come together, will share experience, share jokes, share our stories, and we learn from each other. And as senior, we need to call, how can we live longer? Longevity comes when you have education. So for us, we share our learning, and conversation is called conversational learning. We learn how learning can be done. And we have actually done it with what they call young people, the school, and they have came to us, they say, okay, Mr. Kwan, can the young people come and teach us computer? I say, why not, right? And then we also have young people coming forward to teach us how to play games that they have created for older people. But my most recent experience that we have what they call, we went to teach a student, secondary school student, on how to communicate with older people. You are different. In Singapore, we have 4 different cultures, and sometimes it's not easy for one person to communicate with another person. So we went there. I bring all my seniors along to the school, and they sort of learn how to have communication with the senior. And this to them is important because learning how to communicate with senior is to us in Singapore context is a very sort of sensitive, not easy done. All right. So you must use the right technique, and I learned that from autobiography, which is offered by South Foundation, which I learned from them 10 years back, and we use that to sort of teach the young people to engage older people, and it works, right? So I want to ask you one question here. For you, you can go back and ask your mommy and daddy, Daddy, mommy, what was your favorite childhood food? And let them answer you. And I tell you, they will have a long story come up from their own view. Yeah, right? So that's what I want to share you, right?
Thank you, Thomas. You reminded me of how much energy our seniors have. So maybe I can direct this next question to Chiling. Chiling, you talk about SG healthcare, right? And the idea that we can definitely put more people to use because they've got so much to contribute, just like Thomas here. Do you think our workplaces have not really kept up with a longer life? We're thinking about the 100-year-old life here. And so do jobs need to be redesigned with that in mind?
Yeah, I think definitely. Workplaces haven't really kept up, but I think society also hasn't really kept up, just society at large, right? I think to some of the points earlier, how do young people work with older people, how do older people work with younger people, then people generally live up to our expectations of them, right? So if we expect, for example, older adult to not be digitally savvy, then we don't bother interacting with them in those ways. But if we change our expectations, we might be more inclined to actually bring them along. And one example in my favorite example is actually with the Singapore Healthcare Corps when we needed to deploy these retired ICU nurses who are in their 60s, even 70s. Our oldest was about, I think, 72, if I'm not wrong. And they couldn't be deployed on the fields because there's a higher risk of them contracting COVID and developing complications. So we said, why don't we have them do training, right? And we needed to do this in a very short time. So I said to my boss, hey, why don't we onboard them to a flexi rostering tool, a rostering application where they could sign up for slots on when to come to work. Work as in that the job being training. And I was like, are you sure? Are you sure you really want to? It's a difficult app to use. You're going to have to take a long time to onboard them to this application. I was like, why don't we give it a shot? They're all here. So we lined up the seniors and basically set up a digital clinic, quote unquote, and got them to download the application for flexi rostering, taught them how to sign up for slots, and got them to teach their friends how to do likewise as well. And before we knew it, all 50 or 60 trainers were on board the app, and we were able to deploy them flexibly. Right, so I think a lot of this has to do with organizations' expectations of how savvy older adults can be and how patient we are in onboarding them. Sometimes we overestimate how much time we need to properly onboard or teach a senior to use a new application. In fact, if we teach one of them or two of them, they can start teaching their friends, and you create this network effect that is scalable. So yeah, I think generally people live up to expectations of them. So if we expect more in terms of adaptability of our older adults, they might be more inclined to live up to that expectation. Likewise, the converse is true. I work in a workplace where there are a lot of software engineers, designers. I'm actually above the median age, I think. So, it's very tempting, sometimes for the older adults in the room to say, oh, they're so Gen Z, the millennials can't really work with the Gen Z. It's like, do we really need to use that language, right, to differentiate across generations? When we start using the word, hey, you're so Gen Z, actually our Gen Z folks start to live up to certain negative expectations of them. So I think that the converse is also true. So workplace redesign is not so much about how do we just design a built environment, but also the cultural expectation and social norming that really needs to happen.
Can you remind me that us millennials are in our middle age, or at least approaching our middle age already, so that Monica's not very helpful?
Yeah.
There's a question here on Slido for Adrian. So Adrian, the question reads, with an aging population, there are more seniors in Singapore today in their 60s and 70s caring for super aged parents in their 80s and 90s. And we've seen some very unfortunate news about that in recent weeks, where we had some seniors passing away in their homes, and that's really unfortunate. I guess the question then is, how can we better support them? And related to that, when it comes to social isolation of such seniors, how can the community support them? What are you expecting from community volunteers?
So I think as we go into the aging population, and I quote the previous panel, I think we shouldn't really quote aging population so much because it really emphasizes too much about the seniors. But we are getting into a state whereby potentially we may overload the medical ecosystem and so on. And to me, I think the best strategy is how might we empower caregivers to be able to care for their loved ones, their seniors at home, without having to rely on external people like paid caregivers. That will really greatly reduce the amount of reliance on other ecosystems and really give the family unit more empowerment, more resources, and even the capabilities to even generate intergenerational support within the family unit itself, so that the family caregivers, not just one caregiver, but the whole family can become the caregivers to their own seniors at home. I think that would really drive towards a society that we really build that inclusiveness, the aging-friendly communities that we have been talking about in today's session, starting from a family to the community and essentially to the whole society one day. So how can we drive volunteerism in supporting this to make it happen? At least in the take of SGSCs, we believe that everyone is kind by nature. A lot of us in Chinese, we say, 人之初性本善. But unfortunately,
You're going to translate that for us.
so everyone, I think, is kind by nature. Yeah, but unfortunately, all of us have a lot of responsibility on hand. We have to feed our families, we have to take care of our children, we have to take care of a lot of things on hand. But how can we give them the opportunities to really volunteer during their pockets of free time, to give them that one short moment of that, hey, I make a change in someone's life, and therefore convert this person to volunteer more in the community. And that is really how we designed the app to be, giving that short moment of opportunity for people to give back, to help someone, and therefore hopefully social services and charities can eventually recruit all these ad hoc volunteers into full-time volunteers in their own respective organization. So essentially, I think the last point, I'm sure a lot of people hear that a lot from your elderly parents. Other people's child always seems to be better than you. So, like my mom, although I love her, don't get me wrong, but she always says other people's child is better. But I guess a lot of us, we treat other people's parents much with more respect. We are more gentle and more detailed with other elderly. Perhaps we just have to take the step forward to take care of others better, and therefore we solve the problem together.
Yep. Good.
Did you have something to add, Thomas?
No, but I just like what he said, that senior need to sort of engage with other people. Because at the end of the day, you need to look after yourself, right? Like me, for example, how do I look after myself? I always adopt what they call my 鞠躬 phrase, all right? They say, I mentioned in Mandarin first, 放下, 放松, 放低. Let go, relax, and give away. So this is how senior, when you do meditation, you do qigong, how you relax and make life more interesting. That's what I want to share.
Yeah, definitely can teach me how to take it easy.
yeah, you're right.
I see a question there.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a question, but I really like the question. And I think that in addition to what Adrian has just said, I would also like to ask that question to everybody is, how might we build communities where somebody is missed when he doesn't turn up, rather than just rely on volunteers, rely on paid help, rely on government. Yeah. It is an all solution. All of us are in this together. And so if we build better communities who miss each other, like Martha, we will not have a situation where people are dying in their homes unknown, alone. Yeah, so I think it is actually up to all of us as well. Yeah, thank you, Adrian.
I really like that remark. If I could maybe respond to that with a rather concrete personal experience. I mentioned I grew up in Hong Kong, and one of the memorable experiences was with my grandmother. And there wasn't, senior activity or active aging centers in the neighborhood. I happened to live in like a very, very aged or mature estate. And every morning she would go to the dim sum place, and the active aging staff are the wait staff. They know the dietary preferences. They know what my grandma prefers to eat. She doesn't even need to order food. They would just bring the food to her because she's there every day. And I remember just asking, her friends, so which horse are you betting today? Because lottery is a big thing in Hong Kong. And if someone didn't show up in the morning, the wait staff would go, where is so and so? Like, should we go check on check on him or her. That's also how my grandmother ended up meeting her her caregiver. That's not family. Of course, we take care of her, but in addition to that, there was a 50-year-old lady who lives in the community who checks in on her every day after dim sum, and that's how she spent how she aged in place with the support of a community and a very organically emerging community that's not necessarily designed specifically for older adults.
And that raises the question, of course. Amy, I love your presentation where you showed us visually how places change as well, according to preferences that change with the population. What do you think is one concrete change that you want to see in our cities as our population, the shape of our demographics change? We know that so much has been powered by the rise of youth, but also the rise of longevity should change that, right?
Yeah, I think I think more about the community, building as a built environment part of it, because I think it's great that you pointed out those two photos, because infrastructure by itself, like if people's idea about what kind of space I want, it's not going to change environment. The people's imagination has to be based on how they want to behave. How they like to live their life. Really. So those two comes together. I think these days I'm really challenging myself to think about a few things. The things that I'm really getting to just thinking about is interdependency. What does that mean by design, right? Because I think interdependency, it captures nicely, because we're always talking about helping others, elders to empower older people to do something, or help others and being a volunteer. But we don't pay enough attention to creating a culture and community where people can easily ask for help. I don't think we pay enough attention for it, because I think people, like Japan is really famous for people living alone and dying and no one noticed for months and months. I think the issues are more than they don't get help. I think we have to create a culture where they can actually ask for help, because I don't think most of us are comfortable asking people help. And what does that mean? And I think community development, how does that look like, and what kind of design that we could do. Like, I think it was Suifan talked about bumping space. I don't remember. Yeah, it's one of those incidental encounter. That's what we need, because a lot of time we do purposeful. Like when you go to a nursing home, a day center, you go with a purpose. You see with people who you meet for that purpose, but your friends don't come along with purpose. Normally that's incidental encounter that you just kind of bump to each other. I think we can start to think about not formal bumping space, but how can we create place and many nodes that people naturally meet each other. That might be something that I would like to see more to happen in the city.
Actually, Marc, would you like to weigh in on that? Because as someone who's had vast experience in co-generate, in the experience core, how do you create that interdependence between the intergenerational groups of people and make that a virtuous cycle?
Yeah, well, I'll go back to that idea that I talked about earlier of proximity and purpose, of the combination of being close enough to each other to have that bumping space, but also to find shared interest, and ideally to do it in ways that are sufficiently sustained that real relationships can be formed. So sometimes I think proximity, purpose, and problem solving. Maybe there's another P that goes along with it. But I've seen this in my own life. In the middle of the pandemic, my in-laws moved into a little cottage in the back of our house, and our daily lives became interwoven. And so every night at 7 o'clock, my 15-year-old child goes back and watches Jeopardy with his grandmother, and during the commercials they talk about things, and it's a crucible around which a deeper kind of relationship can form. but I think some combination of proximity, purpose, and problem solving might be the recipe.
Interesting.
Actually, this is relevant to Thomas too, right? So Thomas, you do a lot of that guided autobiography when there's that intergenerational dialogue.
Yeah, I think you're right. What I want to say is that guided autobiography is writing their own life story, right? It's a lot of people, senior people, want to write, but not many of them are able to do it because they don't have a time or whatever they are. And in fact, one of our good old friend, he managed to complete his autobiography and get it printed. Then he passed on. To him, he says it's a most important thing in life, because he shared that with the community. So this is where I say young people should also learn how to write their autobiography. It doesn't mean that it's old people must do it. Young people has a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom in their own way, and how do they view things. And after writing their so-called story, they can view it back much later, or even share that with their own parents. And I think that would be good if young people can able to write their life story. Then it gives a different perspective to our so-called Singaporean lifestyle, right? Yeah. Just to a little bit more, guided autobiography in America is used in the prison, like the inmates are long-term prisoner, okay. And they also use the community center in some other homes and that. They are all used by even by young people. Yeah. Okay.
Suling, can I ask a question?
Oh, Kadi, I didn't see you there. Okay,
That's
please
all right.
go ahead.
Sure. I mean, I think all the ideas being expressed are very heartwarming, but the reality in Singapore is that policies can change things. Now, we are taught to be responsible for ourselves. Self-responsibility is very important. After that, you have to rely on family. And now we hear that trust between people is very low. Yeah. So coming to Emmy saying we must learn how to ask for help. Well, policies have to change. We have been so ingrained for personal responsibility and family that it is very difficult to build relationships with other people when there's less trust, and our inter-ethnic sort of mix also makes it a little bit difficult. And older people who are alive now do not speak a common language. Many of them are not educated. The newer generations are definitely bodes well for the future. So for the present generation of older people who are not very well educated, who have inter-ethnic and cultural differences, and often the minorities, the older people who are in the minorities, get forgotten in the overall scheme of things. So I am not so optimistic for the present generation of older people and how we can make the quality of their lives better. Policies have to change quite a lot, but the future augurs well.
I like what you said. Thanks, very good. I want to share with you that older people, senior people like myself, we are losing confidence in myself. Why? Because our knowledge, our wisdom are so-called captured by the computers. The computer, AI, they can do a lot more. So senior people are sort of find that they become redundant, not used. So how can we survive in the next couple of next century when AI or so-called capture everything, right? So that's a challenge, right?
Yeah, I think it raises good points that you have with respect to Kani's point.
Right.
The idea that we have been brought up in an age of self-reliance, and in Singapore, the paradigm is that the individuals care for yourself before the family and then the community.
Yeah.
I guess the question then is, where's the line between self-reliance, family, and community, and how do we make that a virtuous cycle, if at all, especially because there are intergenerational and inter-ethnic differences? What do you think, Adrian?
I think, and thank you for sharing this. I think personally, from my own personal take, the policy is there for a reason, and pretty much whatever that we see from our surrounding is our own action to take. So the least that we could do is really to assess what is our competency or capabilities, including our older generation. You know, one thing that I learned from one of the programs from SUSS as well, which is the ICOPE, is also the World Health Organization framework. If we can help seniors to understand the different functional capacity that they have, and because they know that their capacity is not, that requires certain support, and therefore they are willing to accept help from their loved ones. And their loved ones can also understand their situation better, and therefore they're willing to give. And in this instance of this process of understanding each of our weakness, the areas that we need help, perhaps we are actually driving a motivation or perhaps a behavior among people that they are willing to start asking for help. So I think that might be a first step for all of us to really try to convince our loved ones, you know, let us sit down together as a family, as an individual seeking help, that it's okay not to be okay, but let's be willing to share our needs, our wants with our loved ones. And if our loved ones couldn't provide it, then maybe how can we help our loved ones to reach out for help out there? You know, the Caregiver Resource Center that we set up we see some of these cases whereby it wasn't the person who needs help that came to seek help. It was their loved ones saying that my sister is the main caregiver for my mother with dementia. She's burnt out. How can I help her? But we couldn't really establish communication with her. You know, it was because of that ability to empathize the situation of another, pretty much their loved ones, they actually took the step up to actually seek help on behalf. I think this is something that we could really appreciate if everyone start to take the step forward to help others to seek help as well.
Maybe I'm just, sharing sounds very idealistic and philosophical, but I feel that the change to create the culture where people can ask for help could be done, starting from one individual. To me, everybody has its own role. Some people are very, they're in the policy, some people in social entrepreneurship. I started Ibasho 20 years ago. I had zero funding. I had probably less than $1,000 in my bank account, but I had an idea. Of course, people think that it is impossible, but I was able to do something. And I feel like I think it's an intergenerational discussion and changing a culture. I think it was Laura yesterday was talking about why we actually sit here. Some can be standing and listening to me, but we have this social norm. But one person to stand up doesn't cost anything. It just takes courage. And I really hope that moving forward, I would like to see each individual think about their own role. And, I can probably do something, I don't know. But everybody has something. I feel like that's the spirit we probably need partially here.
Everyone could use a little nudge.
Actually, as someone who's worked in technology, and you talked about how we shouldn't have blinders when we think about people's ability to use technology at whatever age, how optimistic are you that technology can be a solution?
I've never really seen technology as a silver bullet to anything, much less, this very multifaceted issue of aging. I think technology can be an enabler. It can help in some situations, but fundamentally, a lot of challenges we face, especially in aging, is a more adaptive one. It's a more interpersonal, dynamic and relationship kind of issue we're talking about. I think tech opens up a new frontier of possibilities. Sometimes it can also inspire fear, especially with the more recent AI developments taking over jobs. Those are very, very understandable concerns. But fundamentally, I think it's about values. How much do we value the contributions of older people, or how much do we value our parents versus our children? Like, a very common trade-off is, do I spend $1,000 on learning lab for my children versus maybe bring my parents out for a really good holiday, or making sure that they have a very, very comfortable time aging. So I think these are trade-offs that fundamentally have to do with how much a person value something. And technology there unfortunately provides very little guidance. It can help in certain situations, but I don't think it will solve it.
Yeah, and you raised a good point about mindsets, right? So Marc, just throwing this to you, how much do you think is the mindset that we have of age as blocks? And we tend to think about youth as one category, seniors as one category. Instead, we should be seeing life as a spectrum. Would that help us think about intergenerational interdependence better?
Yes, and I talked earlier about losing a sense of the wholeness of life, and it's very hard to make these transitions into different stages of life when you don't have much experience with people in the other parts of life. And I wanted to pick up on something that Adrian was saying, and also that you were talking about earlier. When we think about the potential for interdependence, there's certainly many ways that young people can help older people, including technology, and many ways that older people can teach young people. And I think that's really important, what the generations can do for each other, but you both raised points about what the generations can do with each other. And I feel like that's the least developed opportunity, and some of the most promising. You talked about the older health professionals, and we started a corps during the pandemic, an intergenerational vaccine corps, in which young people, we get retired health professionals, doctors and nurses putting shots in arms, and then young people doing community organizing to get and we were able to vaccinate 40,000 people with this corps. And in the process, I think the older and younger people developed an appreciation of their unique contributions. So I think more opportunities to do things with each other would be an important step forward.
And I guess it's a good time to end our panel because we're near 5 o'clock. Maybe thank you very much to our panelists. Maybe everyone can give them a hand. And if you've got any questions after this, you can definitely see them after the event.
I love seeing this.